Hello everyone. My name is Tracey Stone and I also work at ArcWest at the University of Bristol alongside John and James and Andrew. And it's my pleasure today to be talking to you about some of the approaches that you might want to take when you're thinking about collecting the data for your research project. Now, in my experience, this is the most exciting part of the whole process, and so I hope you're feeling excited about it too. This is where we get to look inside that black box that John was talking about to find out what's really going on for people, what they really think and feel around the issue that we are interested in finding out about. So these slides are going to take about 20 minutes, maybe just slightly more than that, and basically some methodologies, some pros and cons, and then some helpful tips at the end. Okay, so let's get started. These next two slides are going to introduce you to 5 methods of data collection that you might want to consider when you are designing your research project. So the 5 methods are interviews of various kinds, focus groups, observations, questionnaires, and also documentary analysis at the end. Interviews can be structured, semi-structured, or unstructured. I'll just briefly mention the difference between those 3. So a structured interview is really quite tight. You have quite a tight list of questions and quite a focused aim in carrying out this interview. Semi-structured allows a little bit more space for people to express their opinions and give you a bit more of a backstory, and also to introduce topics that aren't on your list of questions that you might never have considered were relevant, but the joy of the interview is that people bring all this stuff that you hadn't anticipated to the conversation. And an unstructured interview is even looser in terms of its flexibility. So you have a main theme, but the conversation is to a large degree directed around that theme by the person that you are interviewing. So that gives you a much more sort of iterative, explorative angle, and you will get, it's useful for people's stories and backgrounds and motivations and those sorts of topics. Now, focus groups, people often use focus groups these days in all kinds of research. It's really important to consider the composition of the group and who you're inviting. You don't want too many people because it becomes unmanageable, but if you've only got 3 people, it's probably not going to generate the kind of data that you want. So ideally about 6 people would be perfect, give or take 1 or 2. You want to think before you get in there about how you're going to manage the group. Sometimes you can have a particularly dominant person and you might need to use a little bit of body language or something to sort of manage that. You also have to keep an eye out for people who maybe aren't contributing so much. So yeah, a lot of thought, thinking on your feet, and you're also going to be looking at your topic guide to make sure that you cover all the points on there that you want to find out about. Okay, so moving on to observations, and these are basically people watching done professionally. So you will be in an environment of interest and you will have a very focused idea of what it is you're wanting to find out about, what kind of process or interactions between people that you are interested in, and you can sit there and take notes as you watch what's happening in front of you. If I give you an example, it might be sitting on a hospital ward watching how doctors, nurses and patients all interact with each other. You might have a particular process that you're interested in, and you sit there and take notes, and often with a timeline down the side. It's quite good as you go back to have some kind of time scale to refer back to. Yeah, this can be fun. You also have to be a little bit careful about sitting somewhere watching people taking notes. You might have to explain your presence, and it's worth thinking about how you might do that beforehand. Questionnaires, so we can have qualitative or quantitative questionnaires. So a qualitative questionnaire would probably have more space for people to write some free text, give you a little bit more explanation for any boxes that they've ticked, might have some space for some drawings or some other way that they might want to communicate with you. We've all received questionnaires. So we all know that a short questionnaire is a good questionnaire. You want to think about how many questionnaires you're going to need to send out in order to get a decent response rate. It kind of helps with that. And then documentary analysis. Sometimes this is a really good prep thing to do. So you might want to look at news articles or mission statements or whatever's relevant in your context before you start writing your topic guides for your focus groups or your interviews. It can be a really good way of triangulating things and getting your focus really right. Okay, so now we've had an overview of the methods that are available to you. We're going to spend a moment thinking about when it might be better to use one method for collecting data over another, and we're going to think about interviews versus focus groups. As I mentioned in the previous slide, it doesn't mean that you can't mix and match things. You might like to do a preliminary focus group in order to learn more about the area that you're interested in, and then you can fine-tune your questions to use in a series of interviews, for example, or documentary analysis to find how the ground lies before you start developing a strategy towards actually speaking to people. So that said, when might it be better to use an interview over a focus group? So I'm going to use a COVID example and suggest that perhaps if you were trying to find out how lockdown had affected people's drinking habits, and one-to-one interviews might be more appropriate, or just might be more productive really in terms of insightful data than a focus group. And that's because it's the kind of topic that people would probably feel more comfortable talking about one-to-one than in a group of people, particularly if it's a group of people that they've never met before. So in one-to-one interviews you can really dig a lot deeper. You can follow one person's account and ask questions and develop lines of understanding as you go along. So they can be quite intense. Usually last about 45 minutes, an hour, because honestly after that time the person that you're talking to is going to be pretty exhausted, and probably so will you. They're quite tense. So you get to build a rapport, you get to follow up insights and things that you're not clear about. They're logistically easier to complete. It's just you, a dictaphone, telephone perhaps, or you and another person with a dictaphone in a particular setting, rather than a focus group where you have to get everybody together. That said, the negatives I guess are things like they do produce a huge amount of data. So if you were looking at a particular cohort of people, say on one topic in particular, then yeah, 15, 20 interviews probably before you start reaching what we call data saturation, which is when you start hearing the same things over and over again. And you'll begin to get this feeling that, yeah, I think I've pretty much learned everything that I'm going to learn about this topic now, and that's when you reach what we would call data saturation, and you wouldn't need to do any more interviews after that. When you've done that, you will have created a huge amount of data. So as James mentioned at the beginning of these slides, that costs a lot of money to transcribe. It's also going to take you an awful lot of time and effort to analyse all of that properly in order to do it justice. So the resources that you have available to you in terms of people power and funds is going to perhaps have an impact on your choice. So to continue with the COVID example, a focus group would be good for asking people how they felt about face coverings, for example. You know, talking about things like comfort, discomfort, how they feel about it, when they've used them, etc., etc. Now, it doesn't always have to be an impersonal topic for a focus group on the basis that people might not know each other. If you were talking to a group of patients who all have a similar condition, for example, they already have a lot in common, and people can often quite enjoy talking about that sorts of things with people who have an understanding. So you have to use your judgment about whether this is going to work or not. Yeah, the negative about a focus group transcript, it's not a huge negative, it just means that it can sometimes be a little bit difficult to identify on the recording who said what. So you do have to be very careful about that. 2 tape recorders is a good idea, and notes in the focus group as well, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on. So logistically, I guess just getting everybody together sometimes can be a bit tricky. You're going to need, yeah, like I said, if you're getting sort of 6 to 8 people together, it has to be a time that everybody can make. So that can be a bit difficult sometimes, but nothing that you can't overcome, I'm sure. Okay, so we've spent a little bit of time thinking about which method you might want to use, and now we're going to spend some time thinking about exactly who it is you want to speak to. So who you want to speak to in particular is going to be determined by your research question. You have your very clear research question, it has a very clear purpose, and hence purposive sampling. That's basically where the word comes from. So you're recruiting with a purpose that's in line with your research question. And you might want to do this on the basis of criteria. So if your research question is looking at women within a certain age range who've had a particular experience, they would be your criteria on the basis of which you would aim to recruit them to your study. So a typical case is kind of your average person, much broader. A deviant case is where someone has a different point of view. These are really, really important perspectives to include if you possibly can. The downside is they're often the most difficult people to get to come along and talk to you, and that's often because they maybe didn't engage with the intervention or the service or whatever you're looking at in the first place. They maybe have some negative points of view or experiences of that, and hence they're kind of much more likely not to really want to talk to you about it either. So when you send out your information, etc., or you approach people in whichever way has been ethically sanctioned, yeah, they might not want to know. But the thing is, they have often the keys to really improving things. If you can find out what went wrong, what didn't work for people and why, you can feed that back into the system and make things better. So it's really worth making the effort without overstepping the mark in terms of pressuring people to include those views if you can. If it's in a focus group, you can sometimes kind of pick up when someone is not has a different point of view to other people. They may not be expressing it, and it's always worth trying to tease that information out and back them up and give them a little bit more confidence to speak. And sometimes you might find other people have similar points of view as well, they just didn't dare say it. Okay, so snowballing is basically what it sounds. You do a fabulous interview, then you ask the person at the end whether they have any friends or family or other people who meet your inclusion criteria that might be willing to come and do an interview, and you build your sample up over time like that. You could interview the whole population, I mean the population of interest, so it might actually be quite small. You know, if this is 15-20 people, you could interview all of them. Depends on the size of the project and your resources, but it might just be that there are only a few people doing this particular thing or with this particular experience, in which case you can cover a lot. A convenience sample, so these are the people who are really keen to come and talk to you. They may well have been very enthusiastic about the exercise class, for example, and they turned up every week and they really enjoyed it and they really want to tell you about it, and that's great, and it's really good that your first few interviews will inevitably be these people. The thing is, you're likely to be getting a skewed sample in that, you know, just by their very positivity and their enthusiasm, which is fantastic, it isn't necessarily going to tell you everything you need to know about the subject, the point, the topic of your research. So that's why it's really worth going and trying to cover those deviant cases, or if you can't get hold of those, then maybe probe some of the negatives, look for things that maybe didn't go so well in some of the other interviews that you do. Okay, so 3 slides left. This one's going to be about your topic guide. So your list of questions that you're going to be referring to when you go in to do your interview or your focus group. Now, how structured and how many questions will depend on the kind of interview you're going to be doing. So if it's a structured interview, that'll be fairly tight and you might have quite a long list of questions. If it is an unstructured interview or a semi-structured interview, it'll be more open. So your questions are going to be defined by your research question, the title of your project. It's just another reason why this needs to be very clear right from the beginning of the whole process. You'll have your themes that arise from your research question. You'll know exactly what it is, what the main areas that you're interested in finding out about are, and they will determine your main questions. And then underneath those you can write some sub-questions. Now your topic guide is something that you refer to, so it's best generally not just to read from it, but it's there to make sure that everything that's of interest is covered. This is such a golden opportunity to find this information out, so you don't want to miss something. That's about this third point there, basically making sure that you're getting meaningful information, that your research question is going to be met. So one person might have a first go at writing a topic guide and then run it by others in your research group and refine it until you're really sure that you're going to get the good information that you need to answer your research question. Make sure the questions are open. If you give people the opportunity to say yes or no, they may well take it, and then you're not going to get that richness of information that you need to answer your research question. So practice those as well. Taking 2 audio recording devices is a really good thing to do. It's so easy for one suddenly to develop a flat battery or one not to record, and you don't want to waste the opportunity by not having a backup. So you finally got to that point of actually doing the interview or the focus group, and here are a few things to help you through that process, things to bear in mind. So when you're first welcoming people, whether it's on the phone and you're saying hello, or whether you're actually physically welcoming people one day soon, hopefully, or whether it's online, just put people at their ease. It can be a chat about the weather, names, just create a warm and encouraging environment. Sometimes people can be a little bit nervous, not sure that they've got the right answers. So yeah, something along the lines of there are no right and wrong answers and you're the expert in this. Make people feel good, and that will directly affect the quality of the data that you receive. So remind people about the purpose of the interview, a little overview of the project without going into too much detail. Ask again whether anybody has any questions, because they've had the information sheet before, but they might not have read it or they might not have understood all of it. So give them an opportunity to ask questions. You've probably, hopefully, gained informed consent before in a written way, but just hold the intention of that informed consent ethic. So as I mentioned, giving people a chance to ask any questions that they might have, but also just double check that people are comfortable proceeding, they're happy to go ahead before you dive right in there. Remind them that the interview is going to be recorded, they might have missed that, and about anonymity, that just goes with the previous point. So make some notes throughout if you can. This is where it really helps if you can have 2 people, particularly in a focus group situation. If you've got 2 people there, they can be aware of group dynamics. As I mentioned earlier, you can have strong personalities, people who are less confident about speaking. Somebody taking notes that you can discuss later is great data in itself. So if you have 2 people, that's great. You'll have your 2 dictaphones, hopefully. If you are physically around a table, have one at either end so that you pick up what people are saying quite clearly. Set the ground rules for the focus group. So that can be an assurance and reassurance to people that actually what's said within this group now stays within this group now. That creates a feeling of safety, and not only is it ethically necessary, but it also means, again, that the quality of the data that you're going to receive is likely to be better, because people will feel safe enough to disclose that to you. So you've got your topic guide. Don't be looking down at it all the time. By now you'll have a really great overview and idea of what your questions are. But in the heat of the moment, when it's all going on and you're listening and you're thinking and you're responding, it's easy to forget. So do just check down every now and again. And this is another place where a second person can be really helpful, because they can remind you at the end if there's something that hasn't been covered that you intended to cover at the beginning. It says work flexibly through the topic guide, and that's because people will sometimes cover some of your questions, but not in that order. So that's another skill, is just to check and keep a track of what has been covered, so that you don't reintroduce a question that's already been discussed. And then at the end, leave some space for people to bring up anything that they think's relevant or important that they haven't had a chance to talk about yet. This can be absolute gold dust. And often by this point of the discussion, people are really well warmed up, and they sometimes don't want to stop talking. And that can happen in interviews as well. So be open to the timings, and notice if anybody's getting tired. But do make sure that you've absolutely maximised the process in terms of opportunities for people to address the questions that you've put to them. And then thank people really sincerely. Let them know how much you appreciate what they've done. Let them know what's going to happen to the information and what you hope to do with it, and in fact if it's going to affect services or have a positive impact somewhere, let them know about that as well, because everybody likes to know that they've contributed to something that makes things a little bit better. Okay. So here we are at the last slide in the section on collecting data for your research project. A few hints and tips that I hope might be helpful. There are also a few references along the way in the footer of these slides if you want to check those out for some more information. So first of all, know your questions. I mean, you've probably got these completely off by heart by now, and if you have, that's great. It really helps you to think on your feet and be flexible without having to look down all the time and check your questions. Although, as I mentioned, it's always good when there's so much going on in front of you to take a pause every now and again just to check that you have got everything covered, especially towards the end of an interview or a focus group. So with those questions in mind, you're going to be listening, actively listening. As we said right at the beginning of these slides, interviews and focus groups, it's a purposeful conversation, and your research question is your purpose. So keep that to the front of your mind, and keep checking in with that when you're listening to people. Invest in a little bit of time within the group just to think about whether what someone is saying to you is going to be matching up with one of those questions or some area, or whether they're going to be whether it's introducing something new. This is the fine line between gathering gold dust that you didn't expect by listening and encouraging and following their conversation, or going off down a rabbit hole. And it's a really difficult course, so it's kind of an experience thing. It also depends on how well you know the area that you're working in. And typically, if you're doing a string of interviews, the interviews at the beginning will be more likely to be subject to this sort of thing, rather than the ones later on where you know the subject area much better and you're much more familiar with what's relevant and what's not. So keep checking your interpretation. You keep going back and saying, have I understood you right? Or does that mean that? So you can be really clear. And often people will rephrase things as well in a way that might give you a deeper understanding of what they said the first time. And again, to make people feel comfortable, yeah, think about how you dress, how you behave. it will differ. This is called reflexivity. We need to acknowledge that the way that we present and show up in a situation is going to make a difference to how people respond to us. And so the way that you interview perhaps a powerful hospital consultant might not be the same as you interview a homeless person. You need to be aware of really empathetically interacting with people wherever they're coming from. So that's all I've got for you in this section. I hope that's been helpful. Thank you very much for watching them.